Hey folks, Callan here from Something's Recording, and today I want to show you one trick for getting maximum tone and attack on snare drum. We're honing in on snare drum today, but before we dive in, if you are ready to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process in its entirety and really start to hone your workflow as an engineer, then I have just the thing for you. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and it's just a simple PDF that will walk you through the entire mixing process step by step to help you get professional and radio ready mixes without any more of the hassle and without any more of the guesswork. It is a completely free guide, and you can download it below using the link in the video description. Now let's jump in here and talk about getting some tone and attack out of your snare drum. Let me start by showing you what these drums sound like to begin with here, and then we'll focus in on the snare drum here for this track. So here's our finished drum mix for this song. So you can hear it's a good sounding snare drum. It's very well recorded. It's sitting great in the mix. We have some attack, we have some tone, but how can we maximize that great tone that we're getting from the snare drum without ruining our attack? What we're going to do here is we're going to pull in the compressor here from our plugin window. It's going to be the stock compressor here inside of Studio One. All you need is something with a mix knob here so you can mix before and after. If you don't have anything like that, you can always duplicate the track and then parallel process and mix in from there. Now, for ratio settings, we're going to go as aggressive as possible here. So we're going to go 20-1. So it's going to be working like a limiter here. We're going to go very, very aggressive on our snare drum and totally squash it here. The idea is to get the most tone out of the snare drum as possible and then dial it back to mix with the attack here. Now for attack, we're going to go pretty fast here. We're going to go 0.5 on the attack, and then release will go 50 milliseconds on the release. So we're kind of mimicking the settings on 1176 style compressor, but adding in the mix knob here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pull down the threshold here till we're getting quite a bit of compression here on our snare drum. So I've pulled it down. We're doing about 10 dB of compression here. That's a lot of compression. And I want you to listen this time when I hit play. Listen to how our attack is pretty much gone, but we have a lot of great tone coming from our snare drum. We get that nice ring and that nice resonance coming off of the drum, being captured a lot by that snare top microphone, but we hear a lot of the ring from our snare bottom as well. So it's a lot of tone. It's like 90% tone here, and our attack is pretty much gone. Listen one more time, and I'll A-B the compressor as well so you can hear where we started. A couple things to notice here. It sounds like two different snare drums because of the settings we have set up here. So our really fast attack allows us to squash the snare drum before that transient. So right on that transient there, and we have the look ahead in as well. It's helping us here on this compressor. But the slower the attack, the more of that initial transient and that initial attack you're going to have. By having a really, really fast attack, we're squashing that initial transient and neutering the attack here on our snare drum. Don't worry, don't worry, we're going to get it back here. Now, the really fast release helps us get the most tone out of the drum because the compressor squashes that attack and then lets go immediately. So it lets go really fast so the rest of the drum has room to breathe. We get rid of the biggest part of the snare drum, or the loudest part, which is that initial transient, that initial snap, and then we leave room for the rest of the snare drum to come up and breathe. So the snare is ringing out, the resonance from the top of the drum, all of that bleeds in together to give us the maximum tone here on our snare drum. Now what we can do is use our mix knob to mix between all tone and then our original snare drum, which is pretty tight and it has a lot of attack and point to it. So take a listen here, and I'm going to go between 0 and 100% and listen to how it sounds like two different snare drum. One is going to have all tone and one's going to have a nice amount of attack and point to it with that transient on the front end. We'll start with 0, so you'll hear our original snare drum. It's going to be nice and tight and have that nice attack to it, and then we'll go to 100% and you can hear all the tone that we're going to add in. We have two extremes here. One is a nice tight snare drum with a lot of attack to it, and then one is a very long, loose sounding snare drum with a lot of tone to it. Now what we're going to start with is the really compressed all tone snare drum, and we're going to dial the mix knob back, and it's going to be like we're adding in attack to this snare drum. So we're starting with all tone, and as we dial the mix knob back, we're mixing towards that tight attack oriented snare drum. So this essentially now, if we're going backwards, is like an attack dial. And if we start at 0, it's like a tone dial. So we're mixing between the two sounds to get the best of both worlds here. We're going to start at 100 and pull back and add attack into our snare drum. So now right here at 47% is where I'm really digging it. We're getting that attack back from our original snare drum, but we're mixing in some really nice tone from our squash snare drum. Listen one more time and I'm going to A-B the compressor. There's a little bit of a volume difference at the moment, but that's okay. That's not too big of a deal. I want you to focus on the change in the sound of the snare drum, not the volume of the snare drum. Pay attention to the change in the sound. So we're going to go from a nice snare drum has a lot of attack, it's pretty tight, and then when I put in the compressor, you'll hear some tone come in underneath it. So it's going to be a fuller sounding drum here. So we'll start without it, and then we'll click it in here. Now you can mix this in to your liking there. I'm kind of digging it around 47% there. It gives me more tone in the snare drum, but if you're not quite satisfied with that, if you want more of the original attack in, more of that original tightness that you had in the snare drum, dial it back even further here. Like I said, it's kind of a dial between attack and tone here. So you can kind of mix it where you want it. If you want more attack, lean on this side here. And if you want more tone, lean on this side here. It's a nice tool to give you more tone under your snare drum without completely ruining your attack. So remember, all we're doing here, going really, really aggressive with our compressor here, about 10 dB of compression, and then pulling our mix knob back to bring back the original attack we had on our snare drum while also pulling up some nice tone underneath. I hope that was helpful for you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you are ready to level up your mixes and really start dialing in your workflow as an engineer, then I have just the tool for you, and it is completely free. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and you can download it below to start creating more professional mixes in less time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.